Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today for part 2 of our series, How Apple Mail's Privacy Protection Changes Email Marketing. My name is Hannah Wilson, and I'm the marketing manager here at Trendline. Before we get started, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Trendline, as well as introduce you to our speakers today. So Trendline is a digital agency and consultancy primarily focused on cross-channel communications. Over the last year, we've expanded the company with 2 acquisitions, bringing our employee headcount to over 230 people, with 6 offices across the US and Canada. And as you can see, we send a lot of email with over 20,000 campaigns and 3 billion sends. We also were most recently awarded the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies spot at number 1862. So I'll introduce our speakers now. We have Alex Williams and Tammi Miller, both thought leaders here at Trendline. Alex was Trendline's 4th hire and has had his hand in just about every department here at Trendline in the last 10 years. He's been very outspoken about Apple's upcoming update and has been a part of each of Apple's beta tests as the new update begins to roll out. And then Tammi is our principal marketing strategist here at Trendline and works with our clients daily on how to improve and optimize their email programs. With Apple's newest update, she's here to give details on where we go from here now that traditional email metrics are no longer as helpful for us to track. And as for the agenda today, I'll pass the mic off to Alex and Tammi to walk you through everything they know so far, as well as provide actionable next steps for you and your email program. And then I will pop back up at the end to field any questions that you may have. So feel free to send them in the chat box on the right-hand side as they come up. And so with that, Alex, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. And I will be walking us through. So interesting, the beta 4 just came out. So there are numerous betas that roll out through this process. So not terribly different from the last beta, but we'll walk through the whole mail privacy protection breakdown, what's happening, break down some common misnomers about what is actually taking place, so you have a really good understanding of this to communicate internally and with your stakeholders. We put together just basically a checklist of areas for things you can do tomorrow. There's a lot we can't do right now because there's just a lot of stuff up in the air. We don't know how the vendors are going to respond, but we tried to put some things together for things that you can start focusing on and start getting prepared for it. Last time we did the event, we had a ton of questions. We didn't have a lot of time for them, so we tried to create a lot more time today for questions. So fire away. I always like to say there are no stupid questions. So anything that comes to your mind, this is a brand new world we're about to go into. So anything that's on your mind, post it in the chat. So what is mail privacy protection? This is going to be presented after users update to iOS 15, iPad OS 15, or Mac OS Monterey. On iPad and iOS, they're going to be presented with this option the first time they open the Mail app, and that is the Apple Mail app. You can see from the language here, and Apple's very good at this, you can protect your mail activity or don't protect mail activity. It's kind of like reverse click shaming here. So we expect close to 100% adoption on this. One thing is that this is enabled by default, and what that means, it's not necessarily opt-in, but this screen, there's no way around it because this is pre-selected for them to see this screen. So every Apple Mail user on iOS and iPad are going to be presented this. We're expecting close to 100% adoption here. I think if you think about the app tracking transparency effort that for those who work on a lot of digital channels know about, from most of the data I've seen, that adoption is 95, 96%. So I would expect something similar with mail privacy protection. Now on the Mac, it's a little bit different. So in the current betas, at least, they are not presented with like a modal when they open it up. What happens is just they have checked 2 settings here, and you can see from this email on the left. So when I update to macOS Monterey, I open Apple Mail, It's kind of old school image blocking. That's the experience you kind of get here. They're calling it remote content, but every email you open, you would have to hit that button. It's kind of sending people into the settings. We know from most of the mail providers just removing that block images by default option because users, always turned it off. So when they go into settings, you can see up above, you have hide IP address and block all remote content. After you check that box of protect mail activity, hide IP address is still checked, but the block all remote content's gone. I think this is still kind of clunky here. For the users, I would expect this potentially to change. We're just in the middle of the beta series here, but one thing to note here generally, and we'll get into, is like when this will start to update. The Mac is much slower than iOS, so we'll cover that in a minute. So just to kind of see the practicality of what's happening here. So here was a small test I did to be undetectable, you see there in the stats. So I have a Mac OS Monterey running, I have iPhones running, I have iPads running. They're all set up with the same email address. So right after that email is delivered, that is just one undetectable open. So as you think about that, you're not going to get them by device. If someone has multiple devices, it's just anybody who's got an iPhone set up to collect mail or an iPad to collect mail at an address, you're going to get this open. It happens pretty quickly. It doesn't happen consistently at a certain time frame, but it does happen pretty quickly after Apple receives it. So the betas had one undetectable open. The iPhone that's running the current 14.6 or whatever it is, I actually opened that one. That tracked as a separate open. Then I looked at it on Gmail app. I looked at it on Gmail web. There's your two opens from Gmail. So that's a key component here to think about, which is that this open is based on collecting emails, not necessarily opening them. So when you look at your open data, it's not necessarily going to be apples to apples of what to expect. That's the big question: is how many of these email addresses are connected to an Apple Mail app? Even if they don't use it, you're going to get that automatic open. Now, another thing too is when they open that message, so Apple's downloading the message, no unique information about the subscribers coming back from that open traditionally. Like this screenshot here from Email on Acid, there's a couple other vendors that do similar reports like this with a tracking script in the email. I can see how long they're looking at it. I can break it down by device. I can break it down by things like printing and forwarding, their IP address. It basically removes all of this type of data. So it's kind of deviously simple that there's not a lot of reverse engineering here or workarounds, because they're just downloading the message and they're sending back a dummy IP. Looks like from what we can tell so far, there's a couple hundred of them in a rotation. So all of that information you could collect from the open IP is not going to be there for these opens. And then the broader what Apple's doing is trying to hide your IP address. This is the underlying thing they're doing everywhere. You look at the two areas they've attacked. One is your mobile device identifier, heavily used in advertising. And then you've got your IP address. And those are two of the variables that don't really change about you online. You might have a work IP address, a home IP address. Your device identifier doesn't change. They're really trying to hide your identity. And that's the broader effort. So mail is being kind of sucked into that. Another piece of this on how it's functioning is that once that message is sent, it hits iCloud, Apple's servers. They're downloading they're downloading all the images in the email. They don't request them again. So you can see here from this example with this countdown timer, this is in Gmail that we're looking at here. So if you look at the time here, you've got 8:37 on both devices. The Gmail Samsung email here has 21 minutes left on this countdown timer. The iOS 15 version has 6 hours and 3 minutes. So the initial countdown timer was opened when they downloaded it. And countdown timers don't just go in perpetuity, right? There's only so many frames that are in there, and they're loading that when you open it. So the countdown timers, that type of functionality, that serve it at the open, intelligent, real-time type of thing, is going to be the time that Apple got it. I've seen a lot of discussions about potentially trying to hack at that, but how simple their execution is of it, you should probably just start planning for those type of tactics to not be effective anymore. And as a marketing person, I don't want half my audience having a different countdown timer than the other half of the audience. So that's how that's working. Sent it, it downloads once, it's not being downloaded again. Now, an interesting thing here, and this is, broaderly part of the discussion, is how the vendors are going to manage this. This is why we're kind of just in a holding period, because we don't know what the plan is from the large senders. I think from the real-time providers, they have a lot of value in a lot of other places. It's just certain tactics that are being rendered ineffective. But it does pass back, like I mentioned before, there does seem to be a common bank of IP addresses that they rotate. And then they also send back with that open just a generic user agent of Mozilla 5.0. Now, this is a pretty common beginning of a user agent on the web, but it's very uncommon in email. So this might be a way the providers can identify the Apple opens, unless Apple changes that and rotates it like they do with the IP address. So that IP bank and that user agent, potentially, that's kind of what we're waiting to see is that, are the vendors going to introduce a new data point into the reporting that, now just an open's an open? Do you get to a universe where there is a known open and an unknown open, an auto open, a real open, how they go about that? But until that is in the service provider level, if we're left up to our own devices to try to, go through server logs to try to identify these open rates, that's probably going to be a waste of time. So just an interesting element of this to kind of keep track. And I think as we see how the vendors respond, that might become a critical detail. And one question I've got a lot is iPhone. It's just the Apple Mail app. It's people tapping that app icon on desktop, on iPad, on iPhone. A Gmail app running on iPhone is not affected by this, a Yahoo, any sort of vendor. It's just the mail clients that Apple controls. So if you get that question, this is how messy this area is going to be, because it's just that device. All the other devices, all the other clients are going to be working in the same fashion, at least, unless they follow Apple's lead here. But you can be very confident to speak to that. It's just Apple Mail app. Now, when is this going to start becoming a reality for us? We're going to wake up and it's true. It's here. It's arrived. So what you should expect. So iOS 14 came out on September 11th. Based on this and historical estimates, I looked at a lot of research, a lot of data on adoption. You should estimate this coming out sometime mid-September. You should estimate probably 25% of your audience will be on iOS 15 within a week. You should estimate probably close to 50% by the end of October. That number could be much higher, but that's how quick iOS gets updated by users. You can see here right now on the right that 90% of all devices introduced in the last 4 years are on iOS 14. So it's the adoption rate, we're saying it's probably going to be close to 100%. It doesn't mean 100% of every iPhone is going to be updated. You see some stragglers. You've got corporate implications. People having to delete storage space. Supposedly Apple has some solutions for that. I'm not sure if that's around updating or just buying new devices, but there could be an acceleration in the updating period. So this is coming, and based on, there's still betas and there's still some tweaking happening to some of the user experience, but you should be expected that your open rates will be a mess by the fall. Oh, one thing I wanted to note on there, Mac OS, there's not great data on adoption. So this is an Apple Mail desktop feature in Monterey, but that adoption curve is much slower. There's hardware implications to that. There is IT. I know, for example, we have like a 90-day holding period on a new OS release. Some folks I've talked to, it's a year at some corporate networks. So that Apple Mail desktop client will probably be much slower. It's going to move at a slower pace. I would probably, if I had to throw a number out there, I would say you probably hit 50% in maybe 18 months. So that is not as large of a open audience from a lot of data I've seen, but plan on that one being much more gradual. Now, another component of this is iCloud Plus. So we've got mail privacy protection, and we also have iCloud Plus. So iCloud Plus is a new offering. It is opted in if you pay any money for storage with iCloud. I know, like for my family, we have a $10 a month plan for like 2 terabytes across our family plan. So anybody who is paying for this gets these new options. An interesting one is this evolution of hide my email. So now, if you have iCloud Plus, this becomes a lot more prominent than the current one. The current one kind of like sign in with Apple. If you look in your data and you want to see how much this has been used in your program, the address extension would be @privaterelay.appleid.com. One of our clients, we looked for that address, and it was only 20,000 subscribers out of like 40 million. Because right now it's mainly used in the account creation process with apps. But now, anytime a form field is exposed anywhere, if it's in an app, if it's on the web, you get these 2 options. You get your most commonly used email right above the keyboard, and then you've got hide my email. So if you click that hide my email, this screen pops up here. And what this does is it generates these generic addresses, like burner addresses that are forwarding to your main account. And this is auto-generated. The one thing I've seen from these addresses, they always seem to include a 0 and either a period or an underscore. So I'm really curious. I'm not sure how popular this is going to be. I do think now that Apple has made people think about email privacy, which I used to kind of joke like, why the gun never points at us around privacy. It seems to point everywhere else. Well, now it's pointed at us. And if mentally, the users start to, want to protect this more, this could get really popular. The implications of this could be intensive around unsubscribe, because basically every address you create with a website or an app, it's very intelligent. You don't have to remember it, but you can go into your settings and you can just deactivate the email address, which I call the silent unsubscribe. And, email marketers have probably done this to ourselves by not making that process easy for subscribers. So once they've deactivated it, you get a rejection bounce code back, which is 550.5.11. User does not exist. So if you're getting that type of bounce from one of those iCloud addresses, you could probably assume that that's an unsubscribe. It'll be interesting to see the popularity of that, because if you bring a new subscriber in and you just are asking for first name and email address, and you're not really going to know much about them. So I could imagine some folks, similar to how B2B won't accept Gmail addresses or they want your work email. I can see a universe where people don't accept that address. It'll be interesting to watch if it gets popular, but wanted to get that on your radar. Also, iCloud Private Relay. So similar to that rotation that's happening on those IP addresses with mail privacy protection, users that pay for iCloud storage are going to have this option to hide their IP address. In those settings, this has evolved a little bit through the beta process, but you've got, initially it said approximate location or general location. Now it says general location or country and time zone. This has a lot of implications for web personalization. You can see here below on this AccuWeather, when I click through to look at my weather, it said I was in Seattle, Washington. I'm in Portland, Oregon. That's 3 hours away. That's a 3-hour drive. That general location is pretty broad. So it'll be interesting to see. There's a user experience trade-off I think they're trying to balance there with personalization that people find valuable. But yes, that IP address is getting bifurcated. And then one other thing to note on these, I know you've probably seen the unsubscribe from this mailing list prompt on the current Apple Mail. Now this message has been redesigned. It also has a second message option, which is unable to load remote content privately. And in the first betas, this was firing, and sometimes the email wouldn't show up. Sometimes it showed up. I clicked the button, it didn't do anything. And I basically isolated it to mixed image source content, HTTP versus HTTPS. This has been a trend in the browser for quite some time. So it's a good thing right now to just make sure you've got SSL certificates on your images. Because if Apple can't upgrade them to HTTPS, like even if you have it hard-coded, it'll attempt to upgrade it to HTTPS. And if it can't, your users are going to get this scary kind of prompt, remote content, right? What is that? So it's good right now to go through and make sure that you've got HTTPS, because that's happening in the browser as well. So that's where we're at as far as iOS beta 4 right now. So big questions, right? Like, what are we going to do about all of this, and how is this going to shake out practically? So a checklist for you. So key thing to remember, it's every email that's delivered to an Apple client will register an open. So using the open as a proxy for engagement and intent is not going to be reliable with that audience. If you think about how many numbers reference the open rate in a lot of our statistics, you can see the calamity. It's hard to know what that size is. So if you were looking at your data, right, and you have a 27% iPhone open rate, it's not the same 27% of people every time. We're estimating close to 50% of most of these email lists. I think for some programs, it's going to be shockingly higher. Because they don't even necessarily have to use Apple Mail. They could have it on their app. It could be collecting emails, but they use Gmail more frequently. That's how messy the data is going to get. Tons of multiple opens. And until we see how the ESPs are going to respond at the product level, if they try to present that data and distill that down for you, until we know that, there's not much we can do. But we did put some things together that you can start planning for. And analysis that you can run. So Tammi, do you want to walk through what we've put together here?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. So kind of to go off of what Alex was just saying, that's why you don't see kind of a part of this checklist being, start kind of segmenting your Apple Mail audience. That's going to be very difficult and a bit messy. And I think now it's just kind of, like Alex said, just a wait and see how ESPs are going to respond, how your data is going to come back. But really just looking at some more tangible things that you should be thinking about if you're not already, some things you could jump into to start actioning on. First, looking at journeys and automations. So often we'll use opened engagement in some kind of decision split for journeys and automations. So send them down a different path if they open that email or didn't open that email. So really the first thing I would do is just kind of start auditing what you have in place from a journey and automation perspective. always a good idea to audit what you have in place anyway, but to really just go through some of those decision splits and start looking at some of those business rules and making sure where you have anything that's reflecting a did they open, did they not open, that it will still make sense or that is updated based on kind of the requirement there. We're not saying change all of them. I think there is a portion where if you have an automation that's looking at, did they open, no, and then kind of resending an email, in that case, you're going to have less resends because you're going to be counting more opens that might not have actually happened. But for the most part, auditing is kind of that first step, determining where that business rule is, and then you could kind of plan that action around kind of the best way to move forward and adapt that journey in automation.
Yeah, it's interesting, the two sides of that coin, right? So a resend audience is going to get much smaller if you're just working off the data the way ESPs do it now. And then if you've got a decision split on open, it's kind of like opening the gates to the palace. So many people are going to go through. So assuming that someone had opened and generally understood the content, even if they hadn't clicked on it, and just like moving the ball forward in the content, that's going to be really tricky. So yeah, that audit, business rules, the logic, really key.
And then looking at subscriber segmentation. So again, if we're judging things on if someone opened or not, this is obviously a really popular practice to identify an active subscriber base. We're all very reliant on any email engagement we have our hands on, and opens is often kind of the way we'll use to kind of segment what an active audience is. So starting to look at those segments and those rules and look to other metrics. You are not going to be able to rely on opens anymore to identify your active audience. So naturally, kind of that next step down would be clicks. So looking at, that click engagement as that sign of activity, but really anything else you can kind of group into that, from a site behavior, app behavior, account login, purchase, anything that's kind of connected that shows that sign of life, that activity. I would start looking at those segments now and start kind of addressing, like, how am I going to change this? How are we going to look at active audiences moving forward?
Yeah, it really starts with your internal definitions, right, of active. I know one of the baselines we'll use a lot of times for clients is active is 90 days opened and or clicked. So you could start to see that potentially evolve if your ESP is able to split the open group, where you could say clicked and or actual open or known open. This is why this is going to get so hairy. We need a cue from the vendors on how they're going to deal with this to really start redefining it. But I think that's spot on for sure. And then the other activity, and I mean, some of these recommendations are, yeah, they're affected by this, but they're also just generally good practice. If you think about re-engagement type of campaigns, and obviously say by the time you say we miss you, somebody's already long gone. But if you're really aggressive with that, if somebody's active in other places and they're just taking a break from email for a while, factoring in that broader data that you have is so crucial. I think CDPs are going to get a big lift from this, because you're going to need better view of the subscriber, the customer, the user, whatever you want to call them, to really see what their engagement is broadly, not just within our channel. That's always been the trick with email. It's just been so easy. The opens are so easy, and they happen so fast, right? Clicks don't happen as frequently. If you don't have double opt-in, right? A double opt-in program allows you to start the engagement with a click. Start the relationship with a click. It will be interesting to see if that comes back. That's been a declining activity in email for quite some time. And then, yeah, on your onboarding stream, right? Do you have a welcome email that doesn't really have an urgent urgent click opportunity. Definitely the beginning of the relationship here is with your definitions and your classifications are crucial.
And I think talking about kind of forcing some best practices, kind of looking at reporting as well, taking open kind of out of the equation. We're not going to be able to rely on open. We know it's never been 100% accurate of a metric, but it has provided a lot of directional feedback, but it's going to get way more inaccurate for this Apple Mail audience for sure. So just taking a look at your reporting. Where are you relying on open rate? What are you calling out in open rate? You have to kind of take that out of the equation when it comes to reporting and starting to look kind of further downstream, whether that is clicks or conversions. And this is really where focusing on the intent of that email. Opens are not driving revenue for businesses generally. So looking at what kind of action do we want that user to take, and did they take that action? So measuring not only clicks, but all the way through to that conversions, that web activity, what they're clicking through, what they're doing when they get to your website, and just kind of looking at all the opportunities you have within your data today and what you could start pulling in and changing about your existing reporting to just kind of take the focus off of that open rate.
Yeah, I saw someone refer to opens as just kind of like a check engine light, which is, there's been a bunch of debate on, opens are useless or opens are a vanity metric. They've never really meant anything. They've never necessarily meant that anyone read something. Just means that pixel saw the light of day for a millisecond or what have you. In a customer lifetime value, an open shouldn't really have any weight, right? So it's really about what value are you driving for the business, and an open doesn't necessarily mean anything. Clicks and downstream actions post-click. So, for better or worse, I think email's been under-attributed a lot of times because the metrics are so simple and so fast, and so, they happen so often. So it's a good argument now with your analytics teams or how much you have control over that you might just be in sort of looking at a couple specific actions that happen from the email at a conversion level. It's probably a good argument now to broaden that window. If we sent somebody to the web and they looked at a page for 5 seconds and then left, it's not necessarily an engaged person versus somebody who came and spent for 10 minutes, right? Page views, all those critical actions that mean something for the business. You want to start tracking as much of that stuff as you can, because that's going to be the key. And another thing, a question on clicks, the links are personalized. So the IP address is not going to come through, but we're still going to know who clicked what. And I haven't seen any factual technical discussions of how that would get blocked. So you are going to have clicks, you are going to know who they are, and you can work with that data just like you always have.
And then beyond clicks, like we talked about, it's really thinking through, what is that intention? What am I trying to get this subscriber to do? What action do I want them to take? And then, starting kind of looping that stuff back into reporting and into the performance that you're recapping for that campaign. So looking at kind of a different focus on call to action. So Alex kind of touched on this when speaking about like some onboarding and getting that click. The reality is, if you have some campaigns where you're really reliant on open, we've all seen, plenty of newsletters that just keep you in the inbox and read through. And an email like that might be really focused on an open and not a click. So it's starting to look at kind of those campaigns, start identify if you have any of those campaigns, and start to think through, rethink the strategy a little bit. I think clicks are obviously going to become more and more important if that's what we're relying on as that sign of activity for the inbox. So thinking through, do you have a strong call to action on every email you send? Is that call to action, above the fold, and very clear and makes it clear what that action you want your subscriber to take. If that's a newsletter, taking some of that content out of the email and putting it on a landing page just to get that click and that sign of life. So really just looking through your existing emails, again, just kind of auditing the things you're sending, where you are really reliant on that open rate, and then maybe start adjusting your strategies so you have kind of that more, that strong call to action
Totally.
in the forefront.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had an old saying with creative, email creative, which is don't talk them out of it. So many times somebody can have a good headline and then put a 8-sentence paragraph underneath of it. That's talking them out of it. And then you want to have them learn more. It's like, what's left to learn? You just told me everything. I'm not saying be clickbaity, but look at the email as the lily pad. I always say that, it's just supposed to be hopped on to the other side, right? So are you too wordy? I think some programs that rely on email doing the job of the website because they have a tough time getting content like on their website are going to be affected by this. So you're going to need to, be less verbose in the email. Also, when you're looking at your call to actions, one thing I've just had so much success with is that to train the audience to click, you need to be consistent. So one example of that is I like to say like a button has baggage usually. So when I click a button, that means I'm going to have to do something when I get to the website versus a link is softer. How you treat them. Do you have do consistent linking creative approach where buttons always look the same, links are always underlined or a certain color? Being really consistent with that, aside from all of this, is a good way to train your audience to click quickly. So yeah, good time for analysis there for sure. And then I have one question I just want to address here, and we're going to get to some of the questions here in a minute. Is will this break GIFs, like the countdown timer? It will not. It's just going to download the GIF once. Still work the same way it does. I haven't seen any issues with like interactive emails not functioning the way that they're supposed to, fonts, all those other areas. It's just these, it just gets downloaded once and no data is provided really back. So yeah, testing, Tammy, what are you thinking about testing?
So testing, I think, we're in the same boat, right? If we're not relying on open rates, the way you've kind of thought about pre-open testing, such as subject lines or from names or send time optimization, your KPIs for those tests are going to have to change. And you can still kind of look to open rate for some directional feedback. There is kind of that argument that if you're sending to an audience, splitting it randomly 50-50, you might have a similar amount of Apple Mail false opens on each side. So can you use that as directional? Sure. But again, really kind of going back to what we spoke about in the reporting, it's really about what is that action that I'm trying to get to? What am I trying to get that user to do? What am I trying to get out of this test? And it's very rarely to get that open. That is not the end result in testing. So looking to clicks as kind of just that next downstream metric, at least you're looking at, from that subject line change or that send time change, I got this many more people to click through that email and drive through the website or convert or whatever kind of data you have available.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, conversions is the key on testing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a campaign that got blown out of the water by opens and clicks, but the other one converted at a 5x rate, right? Like that's kind of what you want. The thing with subject line testing that's going to be frustrating is because it happens so fast, right? Here's 2 of them, send them, declare the winner. It's all kind of taken care of and happens quickly, right? That's what's always been nice about the open. You just get it back so fast. Clicks take a little bit more time. Another thing to look at, and I think kind of tying to your reporting, Tammy, is how often does a subscriber click? So if you look at like, we're going to do active or engage based on opens and or clicks, I've talked to some customers who have like a 60-day no open suppression list. Well, a click might not happen terribly frequently within 60 days in some programs. So as you're analyzing that, look at how frequently clicks happen and what the general time frame from, most emails have a, 8-hour shelf life where the long tail starts to come in. So that'd be another area to kind of now analyze when you're looking at some new testing scenarios that you can rely on. It's just the frequency of the actions happening.
Yep. And I think a lot of that goes into, as you're rethinking that subscriber segmentation, if that is kind of last open that you're relying on today, and kind of to develop what is the best metric to use outside of opens, it's a lot of that discovery, right? Start looking at exactly what Alex said. How often are your subscribers clicking? If you change, last open in 90 days to last click in 90 days, what is that doing for that segment size? And that's where you'll start to rely on some of those other kind of actions and data points that you have available for activity, outside of email, to start kind of layering those in too, to see, what makes sense from a active audience definition, but also kind of what does that mean for who I'm targeting, and is that getting me to the right people or not?
Yeah, it's interesting. You might have already started to see some of these emails. So right now, if you need to get a click, so I don't think you're gonna see like when Gmail tabs came out and people were like doing little banners at the top of like drag us into your primary tab and all those attempts, which were a waste of time. But yeah, I got an email, I think it was from Starbucks. Sorry if Starbucks is on the phone, but it was like, confirm my email address. I've been a Starbucks customer for a long time. I mobile order every day. And it's my email address that they sent it to. So do we have the right email for you? I think you're going to see a lot of that type of thing. We know do you still want these emails doesn't terribly work great. So I think you're going to have to start getting creative on getting a click that is perceived somewhat as important or useful by the subscriber. Start thinking about those type of messages. Anything you've got in your wheelhouse right now to get a click before this happens from a certain amount of the audience would be a good thing to try and test, just so you can lock that down for those folks. But yeah, we talked about that a little, Tammy, these new email types that might arise out of this to get people to click. Have you had any other thoughts on that?
I haven't seen too much come through, but would not surprise me to start seeing all of those roll through. I think it is, getting creative about getting that click and getting that sign of activity in a way that's not clickbaity and it's purposeful, like Alex said, something that's actually going to, give you value for the click, but really starting early in that relationship, like we talked about, maybe double opt-in is something we're going to see more often. Even just thinking through kind of that onboarding stream and your welcome emails, are there opportunities for the subscriber to click? Because we want to get that activity and kind of capture that right away. But then I also think kind of leading into like this idea of real-time content, this is going to affect the way we deliver real-time content around send time optimization or timers, countdown timers, things that are looking at location and time of open and all of those things. But what that's doing is it's just putting a bigger dependency on first-party data and what we can learn about the subscriber outside of kind of that, depending on those like metrics that are kind of coming back from those open. So thinking about, doing some in-email polls and things that are not only getting that click, but also allows you to do some subscriber profiling, gets you to get to know that audience more. All that stuff is going to help you in your segmentation strategy as you are, less reliant on opens and things. You could start looking at not only did they click because I gave them a really easy opportunity to do that in the email with a poll right there, a bunch of images to choose one, but that click is valuable because it's giving us something that we can then kind of allow us to kind of drive that strategy. So really just looking at kind of other ways to capture some of that data. So not only drive that click, but also kind of learn about the audience in those ways. So as I touched on kind of real-time content, like countdown timers and such, those are going to open as soon as that image is downloaded. So when someone kind of goes back to that email, that countdown timer, that timer is not going to be relevant anymore. So you're starting to see kind of some vendors like looking at solutions kind of around this, looking at making sure, like checking device type, and then as they start to get more information around how to identify these kind of unknown false opens versus others, you might see some of this stuff change, but it's definitely part of that audit process right now that I would just recommend just taking an inventory of where are you using some of these things today that are not going to be accurate once this kind of rolls out in full, and start thinking about some alternative solutions.
Yeah, countdown timers is the easiest one to understand. People see them frequently. The dark comedy is there's a countdown timer to the end of countdown timers running right now, and it's going to hit 0 sometime in the fall. But the other things that are going to be affected by that are like, if you're doing real-time images around like inventory. If you're doing things like shipping status, there's a bunch of use cases that are really useful for the subscribers and for the executional teams that are going to be, heavily impacted by this. And I would say another thing around that, which is a broader email business kind of model discussion, is that in your program, are you paying for things that rely on open rate CPM? Because that will spike tremendously. I don't think that's going to be a sustainable business model if this is as large as we think it's going to be. And also if you sell advertising in your audience, and that's part of the price that you decide with your clients. A lot of that stuff is going to be, massively disrupted. So that would be another area to look through your program, is like, are we paying for videos in email? Are we paying for the real-time image advertising models? A lot of those things are going to be really affected by this. I don't have any hard information from a lot of those vendors, but I do see, like, in the short term, they're probably going to try to estimate it. It'll be tricky. I think the estimates will be higher than people want to pay for, but definitely take a look there. A couple questions that are related to this. So Brian asks, any prediction if Apple will prefetch images for the emails and spam folders? I've been trying to look at this. I can't tell specifically, like in a lot of clients, they will have like Outlook. Well, they'll block all the images that are in the spam folder just like by default. Apple doesn't really have that experience yet. I would assume that they have some known spammers or a known spammer kind of profile, but I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll try to post in a follow-up if I get any more information on that. This webinar will be shared. It'll be we'll have the deck and the YouTube video. So yeah, let's go. Let's look here at a few questions. Generally, okay, so Katrina asks, if you normally open on Gmail but still have the Apple Mail on your phone with the associated same email, will that also be impacted? If you normally open on Gmail but still have the Apple Mail app on your phone, okay, same question. So that, you'd get the automatic open from the Apple Mail that's collecting the address, and then if you opened on Gmail, that would be another open, from what I can tell. I think you're going to have a lot of that. I know I use Gmail and iPhone Apple Mail client kind of interchangeably for different reasons. Like if I need to search for something, I typically go to the Gmail app. Which one do you have notifications turned on for? It's messy. It's going to be messy at that level, but that would result in 2 opens, Katrina. Another question here is thoughts on how quickly other service providers will adopt this type of functionality. This one's kind of interesting, and I've changed my thinking on this a little bit. Initially, I was thinking Gmail's been pre-fetching for years now. I think 6 or 7 or 8 years. Now, we still got the open rate because once they opened it, it was pre-fetched, but it still counted as an open, but it was just the information was just Gmail. So we haven't known like which Gmail client someone was looking at. Location was always Mountain View, California. we've been kind of living in that universe for a while, but it was still an accurate open. And initially I was thinking, okay, Gmail's already got the infrastructure for this, so they could flip a switch. But then I started thinking, Google's late to the party all the time. So responsive design, they took forever to update to that. And then they also try to attack these things with their own solutions. So I could see them, instead of just doing it like Apple's doing it, coming up with a different solution. So initially I was thinking Gmail would probably buddy up quickly, but they're also in the advertising business. Apple's in the device and services business. I think Gmail is going to be slower. Verizon, Yahoo and AOL, they just got sold. That's all in flux. For example, Yahoo is going to support AMP. They support it on the desktop. They said it was going to come to the apps, and now, that's kind of a lot of holding pattern there. So I don't see Verizon or Yahoo, AOL, I don't see them doing like quick changes. Microsoft's, their own their own other world. We know how slow they are to email. So it's a tough question. I don't know. I think Gmail is the big player there, but I would expect them to address this in a different way, if that's a good non-answer. It's a way. There's a lot of ways.
Sorry, Alex. I was just gonna say, I think it's pretty obvious. You guys are just keeping up with kind of all marketing and all cookie-based marketing and data privacy changes. We are definitely on that path of getting closer with these privacy protection and these data regulations, and just getting closer and closer to that. So, even if the other clients are not going to pick up on this right away, eventually kind of putting these privacy options in the hands of consumers is overall going to become more and more popular, I would say. So it's hard to kind of, address when that's going to happen, but you definitely see the trend across other channels for sure. It's caught up to email. It's here. It's starting. So, it's just about kind of how fast that ramps up and how many clients kind of adapt that after Apple.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've tried to reinforce, I don't think the fundamentals of email marketing have changed one bit. The reasons people subscribe, the value they get out of a program, the best practices or your own best practices that you should do to have a healthy program, those haven't changed. We've been overly reliant, I think, on this metric. It didn't necessarily mean anything of open, read versus open, whatever you want to call it. It's going to get extremely messy if the vendors don't present a solution for how you're supposed to dice this out. Then it becomes useless, really. So plan for an open-less universe, or however you wanted to say that.
And stemming off of that, Alex, what about bot clicks? What about bot clicks clicking every link in an email? How did Tammi, what do you guys think? What's the workaround for that?
Well, I mean, that's been going on forever. I know in a lot of programs we have segmented those bots. If it's not too often someone clicks on every single link in an email, it's obvious that it's a bot. I don't think this affects that much. It's almost like Apple has made a open rate bot for every email that they receive. So I think the same methods you do to identify those folks and understand them is the same, honestly. I would agree.
I don't think much is changing there. I think you could still just kind of monitor those behaviors and kind of see where those irregularities are with that click behavior to identify what is coming from a bot and what's not, and then looking at how do I address that, put them on a suppression list, stop sending to that address. But I think that's going to be very similar to kind of the way you would handle it today.
Another one, since all the pixels will be preloaded by Apple before the user opens the email, does this mean that information like user device or user connection type, etc., that are based on a user opening the email will also not be reliable?
Yes, definitely. That type of information is gone once people update. So the other piece there that's kind of, this is why that iCloud Plus component in comparison with this, if you had a UTM profile on, your links and you're like, okay, I'll get that information out of Google Analytics. Well, Google Analytics is just going to show iOS 15 USA or broad location, right? So you're not going to be able to, if they have those two things working in sync together, it's going to be very hard to get at that information. But like I said, we got to wait and see how the providers respond to this. If they provide you guys with tools and ways to kind of work your way through all this stuff and make some sense out of it, great. If not, then it's probably a waste of time to try to reverse engineer my open rate off of a bunch of messy data.
Yeah.
You'll find much more impact in, looking at conversions and looking at other metrics and what actions your subscribers are really taking from email. Put your effort there to really kind of, define your strategies and plan for moving forward. And then to Alex's point, we'll see kind of how the ESPs and such respond, but digging through all that data just to get to some kind of open rate is not worth the effort, from my opinion.
Yeah, in one potential universe, if you think about all of the metrics people track in email, that open rate is a part of the equation, right? Click to open rate, unique open rate, unique click to unique, all these things that have open in them. You take that away, what do you got? You get delivered, you got bounced, you got clicked, and you got unsubscribed. So at a certain level, and that's kind of a thing I think preparing internal folks for, like if you're doing quarterly business reviews or you're doing these type of reports and you're putting all this data in there, that potentially gets a lot smaller. So I think as you think about your programs and how you're evaluated and how you make sense out of them, that is a big change to the equation if we take the open rate out as being untrue, right? Because open rate's going to go way up, and anything that references it's going to go way down. So my unique click to open rate, or my click to open rate, might be 17%. Now, if I introduce another, 30%, 40% of opens on top of what I'm getting, obviously that number looks really bad. So, and in one world, it could get a lot simpler and just be a revenue-based, engagement-based channel. I think we got time for one more, Hannah, if you have one.
Yeah. So say the update hits tomorrow. Both of you, what's your one recommendation for tomorrow?
Find out what kind of business impact your emails are driving for your business, and then focus there. So just kind of going back to, figuring out a way to look at open rate and trust open rate. It's just not worth the effort. So really just understanding, what that business impact is bringing, like with each of those emails, and start measuring that. And I think, speaking to executives and business owners about those types of metrics will be much more relatable than trying to tell a conference room that you got a certain percentage of opens. So just really kind of focus there and make sure your strategy and your email is all driving to those end objectives.
If it was coming tomorrow, I'm going to spend the entire rest of the day getting a snapshot of where I'm at. So as much data as you have there, how's your deliverability right now? It's not necessarily going to affect the deliverability, but if you get in a tough spot, it's going to be the typical remediation is going to be much more difficult now because of the opener being a part of kind of how you rethrottle things in. So I want a snapshot of that. I want a general snapshot of activity as it stands today. Your iPhone, iPad, Apple Mail mix is directional. It's probably going to be much higher than what it shows now, but at least should prepare you a little bit for it. And then, I'm going in and making sure I'm not going to unleash the floodgates by having a business rule with an open rate that's going to dramatically affect more people getting messages they weren't necessarily primed for.
on the dot. So perfect timing. Let's
All
wrap
right.
it up here. Thank you guys so much. And thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
And we'll,
Like you saw in the comments, I will be sending out a recording follow-up for you guys.
long live email. See ya, everybody.